Imagine waking up one morning, checking your bank account, and seeing an extra million sitting there. Sounds like a dream, right? But what if I told you that money was stolen from Apple, one of the biggest companies in the world? And what if I told you the mastermind behind it was my little brother? This isn't just another hacking story. This is about how a 16-year-old kid, sitting in his bedroom with nothing but a laptop, managed to trick Apple into paying him multiple 100,000 for payments that never even existed. And trust me, you won't believe how he did it. All right, let's go back to where it all started. My little brother, Jake, is smart, too smart for his own good. Ever since he was a kid, he had this obsession with computers, coding, and finding loopholes in systems. He wasn't just the type of kid who played video games all day. He was the type who wanted to figure out how they worked. By the time he was 14, he had already learned how to code and was messing around with different websites and systems. But none of us could have guessed that he'd use that knowledge to pull off something this insane. One day, Jake was messing around with Apple's payment system. He had always been curious about how big companies handle transactions, refunds, and digital invoices. And that's when he noticed something weird. Whenever you make a payment, Apple sends you an invoice. But what if you could trick Apple into thinking a payment was made without actually paying anything? At first, it sounded impossible. I mean, Apple has some of the best security in the world, right? You'd think there would be no way to fool them. But Jake wasn't just guessing, he had proof. He discovered a tiny glitch in Apple's system that allowed him to generate fake payment confirmations. These weren't just basic screenshots. These were real, official-looking invoices that Apple itself had generated. And that's when things got dangerous. At first, Jake wasn't sure if what he had found was actually exploitable. He had seen the strange behavior in Apple's system. But was it just a glitch on his end, or was it something bigger? So, he decided to run a test. He created a small transaction, a simple $5 purchase from the Apple Store. Once the payment was processed, he dug through the invoice details and manipulated the data. Then, he submitted a refund request using his altered information. His heart was racing as he hit submit. Would Apple's system catch the fake invoice? Would they flag his account? Hours passed. Nothing happened. Then, he checked his email. There was an official refund confirmation from Apple. Not only had his request gone through, but Apple had credited his account with real money. Jake couldn't believe it. He had just tricked one of the most secure payment systems in the world. But he wasn't satisfied with just one success. He needed to be sure this wasn't a one-time thing. Over the next few days, he repeated the process of modifying payment confirmations, submitting refund requests, and watching the money roll in. Each time, Apple processed the refunds without hesitation. This was more than just a bug. It was a goldmine. Jake sat back in his chair, staring at his screen. He realized something huge. He had discovered a loophole that Apple didn't even know existed. And now, the only question was, how far could he take this? Jake started small, just a test. He generated a fake invoice for $10 and requested a refund. To his surprise, Apple processed it with no questions asked. The money showed up in his account. So he tried again. This time, $20, then $50, and then $100. Every time, Apple issued refunds as if the payments were real. At this point, he realized he had discovered a money printing glitch. And then he got greedy. Jake wanted to see how far he could take this. He generated a fake invoice for $5,000 with still no red flags, $10,000 and still nothing. And then he went for a bigger one, a $100,000 invoice. And guess what? Apple actually sent him the money. At this point, Jake felt unstoppable. He had just tricked one of the biggest tech companies in the world, and it seemed like nobody had noticed. With a little more than $100,000 sitting in his account, he started thinking bigger. He began experimenting with different variations of the scam, tweaking the invoices, adjusting refund requests, and even testing whether he could repeat the process on different Apple accounts. Every time, the system approved the transactions without raising any red flags. Jake wasn't just making money. He was refining his own personal blueprint for scamming Apple. And that's when he made his biggest mistake. Instead of stopping while he was ahead, he got too confident. He told a couple of close friends about his hack. At first, they didn't believe him. So, to prove it, he demonstrated the trick in real time. Right in front of them, he created a fake 1,000 invoice, submitted it for a refund, and within minutes, the money was credited. His friends were in shock. One of them even joked, "Dude, you can make millions doing this." Jake laughed it off, but the idea stuck in his head. That night, he sat in his room, staring at his screen. Should he stop? Or should he push it even further? He decided to go all in. But what he didn't realize was that Apple had just started noticing the unusual activity, and they were watching closely. At this point, Jake thought he had outsmarted one of the biggest tech giants on the planet. He was on top of the world. He had 1 million sitting in his bank account like it was nothing. But what he didn't realize was that Apple's security system wasn't just going to sit back and let this happen. One morning, Jake woke up to an email. It was from Apple's fraud investigation team. They had detected irregular payment activity on his account, and they wanted answers fast. Jake panicked. He immediately tried to withdraw the money, but it was too late. Apple had already frozen his account, and then his phone started blowing up with calls. Legal teams, investigators, even law enforcement. I remember walking into his room and seeing his face completely pale. He looked at me and said, "I think I just screwed up really bad." Apple didn't just freeze his account. They launched a full-scale investigation. They tracked down every single fake transaction. They traced his IP address, device information, and activity logs. Within days, they had a full report of exactly what he had done. And then the real trouble started. Apple had two choices: press charges and potentially send Jake to jail or handle things differently. And here's where the craziest part of this story happens. Instead of taking legal action, Apple made an unexpected offer. They told Jake, "We know what you did. We know how you did it. And we've already patched the loophole. But instead of pressing charges, we want to offer you something else." Jake was freaking out. Was this a trap? Was he about to get arrested? No. Apple wanted to hire him. They were so impressed with his ability to find vulnerabilities in their system that they offered him a cybersecurity job at just 16 years old. Now, you might be wondering, did Jake accept the job? Did he get to keep the money? What happened next? Well, here's what actually happened. Jake knew he was in deep trouble. He had two choices: fight a legal battle against one of the biggest companies in the world, or take the deal. And let's be real, there was only one smart option. He accepted the job. At just 16 years old, he became the youngest cybersecurity consultant at Apple. Instead of being punished, he was now getting paid to do exactly what he had been doing, finding weaknesses in their system. And here's the craziest part. Jake didn't just take the job, he excelled at it. He worked his way up, proving himself over and over again. By the time he was 20 years old, he wasn't just another security analyst. He was the director of cybersecurity for his entire department. The kid who once scammed Apple out for $1 million was now leading the charge and protecting them from future hackers. Life works in mysterious ways, huh? And that, my friends, is how my little brother went from a teenage scammer to one of the youngest directors at one of the biggest tech companies in the world. If you thought this story was crazy, click on this video above to watch another crazy story like this. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments, what would you do if you found a loophole like this?